Rain tapped gently against the hospital windows that morning, a steady rhythm that brought a strange kind of calm to the otherwise busy floor. It was just past 7 a.m. when Nurse Ella Morgan clocked in, just like she had for the last 6 years. Her black scrubs were still damp at the cuffs from the walk across the parking lot, and she hadn't even had her coffee yet. But something about that day felt different. The air was heavier, somehow. The kind of quiet that doesn't last. Ella wasn't the kind of nurse who just did her job and went home. She cared. Deeply. Maybe too much sometimes. Her coworkers said she got too involved, that she wore her heart too close to her patients. But that's what made her good. Patients felt safe with her. And on that rainy morning, when she walked into room 417 and saw the new patient, an older man with sharp eyes, graying temples, and military tattoos disappearing under his hospital gown, she felt that tug in her chest again. The kind that told her this wasn't just another case. The chart said his name was Walter Briggs. 63. History of hypertension, minor stroke last year. But none of that explained the quiet intensity in his eyes. He didn't look sick. He looked alert. Watchful. Like someone who'd been through more than most but wasn't ready to talk about it. "Good morning, Mr. Briggs," Ella said softly as she checked his foreline. "How you feeling today?" Walter didn't answer right away. He just watched her, eyes scanning her face like he was trying to figure something out. Then finally, his voice low and gravelly, he said, "I've had worse days." Ella smiled. "Well, that's something." She noticed his hand trembled slightly when he reached for the water on his tray. She moved to help, but he pulled back just in time, a flash of pride in his eyes. She respected that. Didn't push it. As she went about her routine, checking vitals, reviewing his meds, Walter stayed mostly silent. But every now and then, he'd ask a question. Not personal ones, but oddly specific things: how many exits were on the floor, whether security rotated shifts, how long visitors were allowed to stay. It struck Ella as unusual, but she didn't press him. Veterans often had habits they never lost. Situational awareness. Always scanning. Always planning. Later that day, when she brought him his medication, he paused before taking it. "You ever wonder what's really in this stuff?" he asked, looking at the pills in his palm. Ella gave a light chuckle. "Only every Monday morning." He smiled faintly, but she could see something more behind it. Not mistrust, exactly. Just caution. She reassured him gently, told him what each pill was for, how it would help regulate his blood pressure. He nodded and took them, but she knew he was only half listening. His mind was somewhere else. That night, Ella stayed a little later than usual. She had paperwork to finish and didn't feel like rushing home to an empty apartment. Her phone buzzed a few times, messages from her sister, a group chat with her coworkers, but she ignored them. She was focused on something else, Walter. There was something about him she couldn't shake. He wasn't just a patient. He felt like a signal. Like the first ripple before a wave. She didn't know why she felt that way, but it stuck with her. The next morning, Ella arrived just after sunrise. She stepped out of the elevator onto the 4th floor and stopped cold. Something was wrong. The hallway, usually half full with nurses and techs getting started on rounds, was silent. Too silent. And then she saw them, 4 men in black tactical gear standing outside room 417. Not security. Not cops. These men moved like they knew how to take down a threat in seconds. Their faces were calm, cold, unreadable. No badges, no names. Ella's heart jumped. She approached slowly, her ID badge out, trying to act natural. "Excuse me," she said carefully, "I'm assigned to that patient. Is there a problem?" One of the men stepped forward, blocking her path. "The patient's under federal protection now. This area is restricted." "Federal protection?" she repeated, confused. "Why? What happened?" "Can't disclose that, ma'am. We need you to step back." Ella's eyes flicked toward the room, but the door was shut tight. She tried to peer through the small window but saw only shadows. Her gut twisted. Something wasn't right. Back at the nurse's station, the buzz had started. Quiet whispers, nervous glances, texts flying between coworkers. "What's going on?" one nurse asked. "Those guys are military." "You can tell," another said. "CIA," someone whispered. "No way, this feels bigger." Ella sat down slowly, her mind spinning. Who was Walter Briggs? And what had she gotten herself into? The hospital director called an emergency staff meeting an hour later. Told them the fourth floor was being secured, as a precaution. Asked for their cooperation and silence. No explanations. No details. By noon, the floor was swarming. More men in tactical gear. A few in suits with earpieces. Someone mentioned Delta Force, and Ella froze. She knew what that meant. These weren't just any soldiers. This was the elite of the elite. The kind of team that only showed up when things were already way out of control. She thought back to yesterday. To the way Walter had watched her. Asked those questions. Hesitated with the pills. He'd known something. Expected something. And then it hit her, had she helped him with more than just medication? Had she unknowingly played a role in something much bigger? She tried calling the hospital's patient registry to ask if Walter Briggs was still listed, but the system suddenly showed no record of him. His name was gone. Like he'd never been admitted. Like he'd vanished. Ella felt her hands go cold. That night, she didn't go home. She sat in her car in the hospital parking lot for 2 hours, watching the building. She saw unmarked black SUVs come and go. Men in gear moving in silence, like ghosts. And still no word from anyone. No answers. She didn't sleep. The next morning, when she came back for her shift, her badge didn't work. The scanner beeped red. Denied. Security escorted her to HR, where a man she'd never seen before waited for her. Not hospital staff. Not administration. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Morgan, we appreciate your service here. But you've been reassigned temporarily. Paid leave." "Why?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "What's going on?" "Just standard protocol," he said, handing her an envelope. "We'll be in touch." As she walked out of the building, envelope in hand, Ella felt like the world had tilted sideways. Nothing made sense anymore. A veteran shows up for routine care, she gives him medication. And suddenly she's being removed from the hospital, and the entire floor is crawling with special forces. She opened the envelope in her car. It wasn't a termination notice. It was a non-disclosure agreement. And at the bottom, a handwritten note. "Thank you. You did more than you know." No signature. No name. Just those words. Ella stared at them for a long time, her mind racing. What had she done? Who had she really helped? And more importantly, why were the highest levels of military force swarming a hospital for a man who, just yesterday, had looked like any other patient? The rain started again, heavier now. She gripped the envelope tighter, heart pounding. Because whatever she had gotten involved in, it wasn't over. Not even close. Ella sat in her car long after the rain stopped. The envelope lay open on the passenger seat beside her, that handwritten message staring back like a riddle she wasn't supposed to solve. Thank you. You did more than you know. The words repeated in her mind like a drumbeat. She didn't feel like someone who had helped. She felt like a pawn. A nurse just doing her job, only to wake up in a world she didn't understand. And the silence, no calls from the hospital, no updates from her supervisor, not even a text from anyone on her floor, was louder than any explanation could have been. By that evening, Ella's apartment felt too quiet. She turned on the TV just for noise, flipping between news channels, hoping to catch even the smallest mention of something strange at the hospital. But there was nothing. No report of a lockdown, no statement from the hospital board, no mention of room 417. It was like the whole thing had been erased. She looked up Walter Briggs again. Online records showed a few brief mentions in military forums. Retired sergeant, served multiple tours overseas, decorated, but mostly off the radar. No recent photos. No public statements. One thread hinted he might have worked black ops after discharge, but even that was filled with speculation. Ella couldn't tell what was real and what was internet noise. The man she had spoken to, calm, polite, observant, didn't seem like a threat. But he was clearly important enough for Delta Force to show up without warning. 2 days passed. She stayed inside, paranoid, jumping at every car door outside. She'd thought about telling someone, her sister, maybe a friend, but what could she say? Hey, I gave a veteran his blood pressure meds and now the military has locked down the hospital. No one would believe her. And that NDA in the envelope? It wasn't a suggestion. The message was clear, keep quiet. But Ella couldn't. Something inside her kept pushing, like a voice whispering, don't let this go. So on the third day, she drove back to the hospital. Not to get in, she knew they wouldn't let her, but to watch. To see if she could notice anything. From across the street, parked near the pharmacy, she could see part of the east wing. The lights on the 4th floor were still dimmed, like it was partially closed off. A man in dark clothing stood near the service entrance, not in uniform, but clearly not hospital staff. He wasn't smoking, wasn't on his phone. Just standing. Watching. She jotted down the license plate of one of the black SUVs parked nearby. Just in case. Then she drove away. Later that night, curiosity won. She messaged one of the nurses she trusted, Lena, someone she'd worked with for years. Hey. You okay? Been thinking about what happened on our floor. No response for hours. Then, don't text this stuff. Just, let it go, Ella. Please. That was it. No emojis. No warmth. Not like Lena at all. Ella stared at the screen. Her friend was scared. That confirmed it, this wasn't just about a patient anymore. Something much deeper was happening. She spent the next day doing something she'd never done before, investigating. Not because she thought she was some kind of detective, but because she couldn't sit still. She looked into military protection protocols, what agencies might be involved in civilian extractions, anything that could explain why a hospital would be sealed off for one man. She learned that Delta Force was rarely used on U.S. soil. If they were involved, it was either a crisis, or a cover-up. She searched deeper into Walter Briggs' background, digging through military archives, forums, even obscure online records. One obscure post caught her attention. It was a blog entry, old, written by a former military contractor, now deceased. In it, the writer mentioned a small group of operatives trained for deep containment missions. Not just combat, but recovery of people or tech considered too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands. One name was listed briefly in a redacted image, Briggs, W. Ella's hands trembled slightly as she read it again. Recovery of people or tech. Was Walter Briggs hiding something? Or worse, carrying something? She thought back to that moment when he looked at the pills. Not with fear. With calculation. As if he wasn't worried about side effects, he was trying to decide if he could take them at all. She began replaying every interaction with him. His questions. The way he scanned the room. The way he had thanked her. Not out loud, but with that final message. He knew this would happen. He knew they were coming. So why had he trusted her? Was it something she said? Something she did? The more she thought about it, the more it made sense. Maybe he had needed time. A delay. Maybe giving him the meds on her shift bought him hours he wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Maybe he'd used that time to set something in motion. The next morning, Ella woke to find an unmarked package at her front door. No return address. No stamps. Just her name written neatly in black ink. She stood in the hallway for a full minute before picking it up. Her heart thumped so loud, she was sure the neighbors could hear it. Inside was a flash drive and a small note. If you're reading this, then I was right to trust you. Don't open it unless you're alone. W. Her breath caught. She shut the door quickly, locked every bolt, and pulled the blinds shut. She stared at the flash drive for what felt like an hour before finally plugging it into her old laptop. No internet connection. Just in case. The drive had one file, a video. She clicked play. Walter appeared on screen, seated in what looked like a motel room. The lighting was dim, his face more tired than she remembered. But his voice was steady. If this reaches you, it means I was either taken or eliminated, he said calmly. I didn't want to drag anyone into this, but I had no choice. They'll come looking for what I have, what I know. I've carried it too long. I had to trust someone. You were kind. You asked questions. You saw me. That mattered. He leaned forward slightly. You're probably wondering why a hospital nurse is involved in something like this. Truth is, I needed someone unconnected. Off the radar. Someone who wouldn't be suspected. I couldn't trust former allies. Not anymore. The video glitched slightly, then resumed. There's a data chip implanted in my arm. Experimental. It holds information on a project I was part of, something not even the Pentagon officially acknowledges. It's not just about weapons. It's about control. Human trials. Untraceable missions. We were tools to them. Ella stared in shock. The words barely made sense. Human trials. I tried to go dark, he continued, but someone found me. I faked the stroke to get admitted to a secure civilian facility. That gave me time to plan an extraction. But I needed help, someone like you, to make it possible. He looked straight at the camera. If they find you, they'll ask questions. They'll pretend you were involved. You weren't. You were just a good nurse doing her job. But now, they'll think you know something. The screen cut to black. Ella sat frozen. She didn't know whether to cry or scream. She wasn't trained for this. She wasn't a spy. She gave people medicine and comforted grieving families. That's who she was. But now, she was holding proof of something she didn't even understand. The next morning, someone knocked on her door. Not loud. Just one knock. Then silence. She looked through the peephole. Nobody was there. But an envelope had been slipped under the door. No note this time. Just a photo of her and Walter. Taken through the hospital window. She backed away slowly, her breath shallow. She wasn't just being watched. She was being hunted. And she had no idea who to trust anymore. Ella didn't sleep that night. The photo sat on her kitchen counter, staring back at her like a threat. Her hands trembled every time she glanced at it, her face in the frame, standing by Walter's bedside. Just a nurse doing her rounds. But someone had been watching. Not from inside the hospital. From outside. And they'd made sure she knew it now. By morning, Ella's nerves were shot. She hadn't eaten, barely drank water. The world outside her window seemed to move too fast. Normal people walking their dogs, going to work, laughing over coffee, and here she was, stuck in a nightmare that only got worse the more she tried to understand it. She pulled the blinds tighter and double-checked the door lock. Again. Her mind kept going back to the video. Walter had talked about something implanted in his arm. A chip. Some kind of classified data. She wasn't a tech expert, but she knew enough to understand that if what he said was true, it meant he was carrying something incredibly valuable. And if he'd made it all the way to a civilian hospital without being stopped, it meant he'd been running for a long time. Ella paced her living room, trying to piece together what she knew. Walter had chosen her. Not because she was special, but because she wasn't. Because she blended in. She was invisible to the kind of people who watched everyone else. A perfect cover. And now, she was tangled in it whether she wanted to be or not. Later that day, she drove to a small coffee shop 2 neighborhoods over, wearing sunglasses and a hoodie. She parked on the side street, checked for tails, though she wouldn't know what to look for, and slipped inside. In a corner seat near the back, she found Samir. He used to work IT at the hospital before getting laid off in budget cuts. They'd stayed in touch over social media, mostly through shared memes and old jokes. But Samir was sharp. A little paranoid, maybe, but smart. If anyone could help her figure out what Walter's video meant, it was him. She handed him the flash drive under the table. "I need you to look at this," she whispered. "Don't copy it. Don't share it. Just, tell me what you find." He frowned. "Is this legal?" She didn't answer. Samir sighed and plugged it into his laptop. It took less than 10 seconds for his face to go pale. "Where did you get this?" "Don't ask." He leaned in. "Ella, this isn't normal video data. There's encrypted code layered underneath. A lot of it. Deep encryption. Military-grade stuff. Not just surveillance or medical files. This is big." She swallowed hard. "Can you break it?" "Not without getting noticed." If I try to dig too deep, someone's gonna see the ping. This thing is shielded, but only barely. Whatever's in here, someone didn't want it found. Can you extract it safely? He hesitated. Maybe. But I'll need time. And a burner setup. If I use my usual gear, they'll trace it. Fast. She nodded. Do what you can. Samir looked at her for a long moment. Ella, are you in danger? She didn't lie. I think so. That night, she drove home with her phone powered off and the battery pulled. Samir had warned her, if they're tracking you, your phone's the first thing they'll use. The paranoia was starting to settle in her bones now. Every car behind her felt like it was following. Every stranger on the sidewalk felt like a threat. She couldn't go back to her apartment. Not now. It was compromised. Someone knew where she lived. So she drove to her grandmother's old cabin just outside of town. It had been sitting empty since her death 2 years ago. Ella still had the keys, and no one else even knew it was hers. She parked the car a quarter mile down the road and walked the rest of the way through tall grass, heart pounding. Inside, the air was musty, the furniture covered in sheets, but it was quiet. No cameras. No lights. No signals. Safe, for now. That same night, across town, a different conversation was happening in a dimly lit office. A man in a dark gray suit stood behind a desk, watching surveillance footage on a large screen. The video was grainy but clear enough. A nurse. Ella Morgan. Talking to Walter Briggs. Handing him medication. Pausing too long. Looking too curious. She's not cleared, the man said coldly. Another figure stepped forward. This one wore tactical gear, face lined with old scars. She doesn't know what she's holding, he said. That doesn't matter. If Briggs left her anything, we have to assume she's a breach. What's the order? The man behind the desk didn't answer at first. Then he tapped a folder on the table. Track her. Contain her. Quietly. Understood. Back at the cabin, Ella sat on the floor with her back against the wall, staring at the small wood stove as the fire crackled low. She hadn't told anyone she was here. Not even Samir. Every time she thought of the photo slipped under her door, her stomach turned. They were watching her before she even realized it. She pulled out the note from the flash drive again. Don't open it unless you're alone. What if this wasn't just about information? What if Walter had wanted her to finish something? The next morning, Samir called from a payphone. I got a fragment decrypted, he said quickly. There's a list. Names. Coordinates. Medical terms I don't recognize. And a string of letters that might be a project code, Raven, 42. Ella froze. What kind of names? Doctors. Soldiers. Government contractors. Some are marked, terminated. Others say, active. Are we on it? A pause. Not yet. But someone will be checking. Yeah. Ella hung up and leaned against the phone booth. Her heart was beating too fast again. Project Raven, 42. She'd never heard of it, but the sound of it alone gave her chills. She knew enough to understand that when government files start listing people as terminated, it's not just paperwork. It's a warning. The next day, Ella received another package. This time, it was left in the mailbox at the cabin. Inside, A single hospital ID badge, hers, burned along the edges. And a folded piece of paper with just 2 words. "Time's up." She dropped it, hands shaking. Whoever they were, they'd found her again. They were watching. And they were closing in. Ella stared at the burned hospital ID, her fingers trembling. The edges were blackened and curled, the photo on it almost melted away. Her name barely visible. It wasn't just a message. It was a warning. A final one. They wanted her to know time was running out. She grabbed the note again, "Time's up," and stuffed both it and the badge into a drawer, locking it. Her heart thumped in her chest like a drum as she stepped outside the cabin, scanning the trees. Wind rustled the leaves, but she couldn't shake the feeling she was being watched. She tried to breathe, but the air felt thick and dry. Every step back toward the door felt heavier. Inside, she locked everything, pulled the curtains closed, and went straight to the attic. That's where her grandfather used to keep his hunting gear, old but reliable. She found a rusted flare gun and a pair of binoculars. No real weapons, but it made her feel a little less helpless. She'd never even fired a real gun before, but now, survival felt like something she had to consider. Her burner phone buzzed. It was Samir. "I need to see you," he said. His voice was low, rushed. "I finished decoding the rest. You need to hear it in person." Ella hesitated. "It's not safe." "I know. But I don't think we've got a choice anymore. Someone's been poking around my building. I'm leaving town. If you want to know the rest, meet me in 2 hours. That gas station near Route 18, behind the old truck stop." She agreed. Hung up. And left 5 minutes later with nothing but a small backpack and a flare gun tucked under a blanket in the trunk. The drive to Route 18 was long and silent. She kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a black SUV creeping up behind her. But the road stayed empty. She arrived at the gas station just before sunset. The truck stop was abandoned, its roof half caved in, windows broken. The whole place looked like it had been forgotten. Except for the single motorcycle parked near the back. Samir sat on the curb, hoodie pulled over his head, tapping his foot. When she got out, he didn't speak right away. He looked over both shoulders, then handed her a flash drive. "I decrypted everything," he said. "It's worse than I thought." Ella swallowed. "Tell me." "Project Raven 42 wasn't just about tech," he said. "It was about neurocontrol. Behavioral mapping. Real-time emotional tracking. They were trying to figure out how to remotely influence decisions. Thoughts. Even identity. Walter wasn't just a test subject. He volunteered. At least at first." Ella's throat tightened. "Volunteered for what?" "Deep ops. The kind where they erase parts of your memory, implant instructions, and activate you later with a trigger phrase." He didn't remember everything until recently. That chip in his arm. It didn't just store data. It was wired into his nervous system. He was the last living subject. The others, according to the files, either went mad or disappeared. She sat down on the edge of the pavement. "So why me? Why give it to me?" Samir's voice dropped. "Because you were never on their grid. You weren't military. You weren't government. You weren't even a contractor. Just a civilian. That made you invisible. And that meant you were safe, at least for a while. Ella stared at the setting sun. And now? Samir looked away. Now you're not. Before she could respond, a sharp buzzing sound split the air. A drone zipped overhead, small, silent, but fast. Samir's eyes widened. We have to go, now. They jumped into separate vehicles, agreeing to split up and meet again later. Ella took a side road through a field, tires crunching over gravel and weeds. She didn't stop until she reached a rundown motel on the edge of town. It had no cameras, no front desk, just cash-only rooms and flickering lights. She locked herself in room 6, heart pounding, staring at the flash drive Samir had handed her. She didn't dare plug it in. Not here. But she opened the folder he gave her. Inside were scanned documents, grainy images, a few audio clips. One photo stood out, Walter, younger, standing with a group of men in desert camo. Behind them, a government logo barely visible on a tent. Beneath it, scribbled in pen, Operation Halo Stone, Raven Trials, Phase 3. Ella stared at the image until her eyes blurred. Her burner phone buzzed again. It was a text. They found Samir. Do not return to the cabin. No name. No number. Just that message. She stared at the screen, her body suddenly cold. Her hands trembled, then went numb. She tried calling Samir back. No answer. Not even voicemail. Outside the motel, a car slowed down. Headlights swept across her window. She dropped to the floor, crawling toward the bed, grabbing the flare gun. The car didn't stop, but her nerves were on fire now. The walls were closing in. Walter was gone. Samir might be. And now she was holding the only thing that proved any of this was real. If they caught her, they'd erase it. They'd erase her. Just like the others. Suddenly, the flare gun didn't feel so useless. She needed a plan. And she needed help. But who could she trust? She thought about Lena again, her friend at the hospital. The one who had told her to let it go. What if Lena hadn't just been scared? What if she was in on it? Or worse, being watched herself? Her only shot now was to go higher. Find someone above the chain. Media maybe. But she knew most would brush her off. A wild story from a nurse with no proof. Unless she had everything. The chip. The data. And something public enough that it couldn't be covered up. Ella stood and opened her bag. She tucked the flash drive into a metal pill bottle, then wrapped it in a sock and stuffed it inside a coffee can. Then she buried it outside behind a trash bin. She memorized the location. She wasn't going down with everything in her hands. Back in the room, her burner buzzed again. This time, it was a video. She clicked play. Samir. His face bruised. Blood on his shirt. I don't know where she is, he stammered, eyes darting off camera. I gave her the drive. That's it. I swear. A voice off-screen asked calmly, did she see the names? Samir hesitated. Then, yes. The screen cut out. Ella dropped the phone. Her body was shaking. Her eyes burned. They had him. And now they knew she had it all. She backed away from the screen, heart hammering, breath shallow. She was running out of time. No more safe places. No more hiding. The knock came just after midnight. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. Ella stood frozen in the middle of the room, the flare gun pointed at the door. Someone waited on the other side. No footsteps. No voice. Just pressure. Her heart beat so loud it drowned everything else. She tightened her grip. She knew this was it. They were either coming to take her, or silence her forever. Ella didn't move. She stood in the center of the dim motel room, her back against the nightstand, the flare gun shaking in her grip. The knock echoed in her mind, over and over, louder than it should have been. 3 slow knocks. Then nothing. No voice. No footsteps walking away. Whoever it was, they were still out there. The motel's old heater buzzed weakly behind her, but she barely noticed the warmth anymore. The silence outside stretched long enough to become unbearable. She moved quietly to the peephole, 1 foot at a time, her breath shallow, pressing her eye to the glass. No one was there. Not in front of the door, not in the hallway, not in the shadows. Her stomach dropped. They were trying to rattle her. Make her move first. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the back of the motel. Something heavy hitting metal. Then a dog barked. Tires screeched. Ella dropped from the door and crouched beside the bed, eyes wide. She had to move. If they came through the door, she wouldn't stand a chance with a flare gun and a sock full of fear. She reached for her bag, but before she could unzip it, her phone vibrated again. No number. Just one message. It's not just Walter. You were on the list too. Her blood ran cold. The words didn't make sense. She was on the list. She scrolled up to reread the old messages. Nothing. No name. No clue who was sending them. She hadn't told anyone about the list. Not even Samir had said anything about her name being on it. If she was on it, it meant someone else had access to deeper files. Or had been watching her long before this started. She thought back. All the small moments that felt strange before, her badge not scanning one day, a patient file she couldn't access, a hospital visitor in a military jacket asking odd questions about her shift schedule. Had they been monitoring her even then? Ella's thoughts raced. What if Walter hadn't picked her at random? What if she'd been part of the project somehow, without knowing it? The door creaked. She spun around, flare gun raised, heart hammering so loud she could barely hear the noise. But it wasn't the front door. It was the bathroom. Ella froze. She hadn't opened it. She was sure. She'd checked it twice when she arrived. It had been locked. The knob turned again. Just a slight nudge, like someone testing to see if she'd react. She backed away slowly, hand trembling, sweat slicking her palm. "Who's there?" she whispered. No answer. She inched forward and grabbed the edge of the nightstand, pulling out the motel's heavy lamp with her free hand. It was the closest thing she had to a weapon that wasn't a single-shot flare. With one deep breath, she kicked the bathroom door open and pointed the light in, bracing for the worst. But there was no one there. Just steam on the mirror and the faint smell of soap. She stepped in, slowly. Then she saw it, written across the fogged mirror with a fingertip, barely visible now. "Run." Ella stumbled back, fear punching through her chest like a knife. She hadn't taken a shower. The steam wasn't from her. Someone had been in there. Recently. Maybe while she was outside burying the flash drive. Maybe while she was checking her phone. Maybe they were still close. She bolted from the motel room and jumped into her car, locking the doors and speeding off without looking back. Her heart felt like it was about to tear through her ribs. She didn't even know where she was driving. She just needed distance. Needed time to think. The second twist churned in her brain. You were on the list too. She didn't remember signing anything. She didn't remember being tested or interviewed or contacted by any agency. But what if she had been part of something and just didn't know? What if she'd been monitored since nursing school? Selected early. Groomed, even. She pulled over at an empty roadside lot and opened Samir's files again. Maybe she missed something. She filtered the list of names by hospital. Only 5 came up. One name immediately caught her eye. Dr. Leland Mercer. Her old supervising physician. Retired 2 years ago. Known for pushing experimental therapies. Always had government visitors shadowing him. She remembered his cold eyes, the way he once told her, "You'd be surprised how valuable a clean mind is in a dirty world." She hadn't understood it then. She did now. She scrolled through the file, heart racing, until she found his records. Raven, 42, subject recruitment evaluation, Morgan, Ella. There it was. Her file. Her evaluations. Psychological screenings she didn't remember consenting to. Notes about her reliability, her emotional resilience, her loyalty under pressure. She wasn't a bystander. She'd been a candidate all along. Walter didn't just choose her. He recognized her. She tossed the phone to the passenger seat, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. She wasn't just holding dangerous information now. She was the danger. Or at least, she could be, if activated like Walter had been. What if they weren't trying to kill her? What if they were trying to wake her up? Her phone vibrated again. Another message. This one from a blocked number. A single video. She tapped it, almost afraid to look. It was surveillance footage from inside the hospital. Her. In a patient's room. But not Walter's. A different man. She watched herself walk in, speak calmly, administer something from a vial, then walk out without looking back. The man began to convulse seconds later. Ella's breath caught in her throat. She didn't remember that. At all. The timestamp showed the date, 6 months ago. She dropped the phone like it burned. Her knees gave out. She sat on the roadside, wind whistling through the open car door. Everything spun around her. Was that video real? Or doctored to shake her? If it was real, what had they made her do? She looked up at the sky, clouds rolling in, thunder low in the distance. She thought this had all started with helping a veteran. But maybe it started long before that. And now the ghosts of every secret, every test, and every command whispered into her subconscious were waking up all at once. The flare gun was still in the glove box. And somewhere out there, the people behind Project Raven, 42 were watching. Waiting. And maybe, preparing to trigger her again. The sky had turned dark, and a quiet drizzle began to fall as Ella sat frozen beside her car, heart cracked open by the video she couldn't explain. She didn't know what scared her more, that the footage was real, or that a part of her believed it could be. The image of the convulsing man, her own expressionless face walking calmly out of the room, it clung to her like smoke. Cold. Paralyzing. She wiped her face, not sure if it was rain or tears, and climbed back into the car. She had to finish this. It didn't matter anymore what it cost. She couldn't run, not if there was even the slightest chance she'd been part of something she didn't understand. It was time to find out the truth, even if it shattered everything. There was only one person left who could give her that, Dr. Leland Mercer. She knew where he lived. He'd retired to a remote lake house in upstate New York, the kind of place people chose when they didn't want to be found. It was a 6-hour drive, but she didn't stop. Not for food, not for sleep. By the time she reached the gravel path that led through the trees, dawn was beginning to push through the clouds. The cabin was quiet. Secluded. Almost too still. Ella parked down the road, grabbed the flare gun, and kept her bag close. She crept up the path, eyes locked on the front porch, then made her way to the back door, where a small motion light flickered weakly. Her hand was on the knob when she heard it, movement inside. A shadow passed across the window. She ducked, holding her breath. Then the door creaked open, slow and deliberate. "I was expecting you," a voice called softly. It was him. Dr. Mercer. Older. Grayer. But unmistakably him. He didn't look surprised. Not angry. Just, resigned. Ella stepped inside slowly, flare gun still raised. "Tell me the truth," she said. "No more games." He nodded and walked calmly to the living room, where a fire was already burning. "You were selected when you were 23, he said, sitting down. "Your neurological profile was rare. Highly empathic, low resistance to programming, unusually stable under pressure. You were never meant to be activated. You were part of the sleep group. Meant to observe. To be a failsafe." Ella's voice cracked. "Then why did Walter come to me?" Mercer looked at the fire, then back at her. "Because he remembered what they did to him. And somewhere deep inside, his instincts told him you were the one person they couldn't reach. Unless..." He trailed off. "Unless what?" "Unless your protocols had already been triggered." Ella felt her knees weaken. She didn't sit. Couldn't. "I never agreed to any of this." "You didn't need to," Mercer said quietly. "Your consent was buried in paperwork. Clinical trials. Volunteer studies. Harmless forms at the time. That's how they got most of the early subjects. We didn't think it would go this far." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small black box, sliding it across the table. "What is this?" she asked, not touching it. "A neural map. Yours. From 7 years ago. Before they stopped phase 3. You were marked as dormant, but flagged as relevant if destabilization occurs. Walter's awakening destabilized the entire archive. Everything unraveled. The fail-safes collapsed." Ella stared at the box. "And what about the man in the hospital? The one in the video?" Mercer didn't blink. "You were drugged. Temporarily. Long enough for them to test a command string embedded in your subconscious years ago. That patient was a controller. He was implanted too. They used you to test if a sleeping agent could override a dominant one." Her stomach turned. "You're lying." Mercer didn't react. "I watched myself do it. Because that's what they want you to believe. They erased what came before. They edited what came after. You were never a killer, Ella. But they needed you to think you could be." She staggered back, dizzy, heart pounding. "If they could do that, why let me go? Why not finish it? Because you have the last working copy of the project key. Walter passed it to you. It's not just data. It's the fail-safe against full deployment. You're not just a subject, you're a shield. Suddenly, a shot cracked outside. Mercer flinched. They're here. Ella spun around and ducked as the window shattered, glass raining down. A dark figure moved outside, tactical gear, visor down. Delta Force, or whatever division had been trailing her since the hospital. She grabbed the black box, then Mercer by the arm. Is there another way out? He pointed to the basement. Tunnel out to the lake. It's how I've stayed off-grid. They ran. As they climbed down the narrow stairs, gunfire exploded upstairs. The sound of boots. Shouts. Ella didn't look back. The tunnel was damp, barely lit by old bulbs. It snaked beneath the cabin, then opened at a small dock hidden beneath trees. A canoe waited. As they paddled across the still water, dawn finally broke. On the far shore, she dropped to her knees, breathing hard, the box still in her hand. Mercer sat beside her, coughing. You have a choice now, he said. Destroy that box, and vanish. Or release what's on it. Burn everything down. Including yourself. She looked out across the water. She remembered Walter's eyes. The hospital. Samir. All the people who would never get answers. Then she made her decision. Later that day, in a busy city hours away, a journalist at an independent media outlet received a package. No return address. Just a flash drive and a note. If I disappear, tell the world what Project Raven 42 really was. The story went viral. The footage. The files. The experiments. The Department of Defense denied everything. The hospital refused comment. And Ella Morgan? She vanished. But a month later, reports surfaced of a nurse working at a small clinic in Chile. Quiet. Compassionate. American accent. No records. No past. Only a whispered name. And then, one final twist. Back at the cabin, weeks after it had been abandoned, a man in a black suit entered the ruins. He walked through the wreckage calmly. Then he knelt beside the broken floorboards and pulled out a second black box. Identical to the one Ella had taken. He smiled, whispered, just as planned, and disappeared into the woods. Some doors, once opened, never truly close. The breeze rolling off the lake carried a quiet peace that didn't match the chaos Ella had just left behind. She sat on a rock, staring out at the water, trying to steady her thoughts. The world had felt so small a few weeks ago, just a nurse, a patient, and a hospital hallway. Now it felt like the world had cracked open, and she had fallen through. She thought of Walter and the strange calm in his eyes that day he asked for help. She understood now. He hadn't just been warning her, he'd been passing on the last piece of a dying truth. He knew what was coming. And somehow, he believed that she could survive it. The data had gone out. It was too late for anyone to bury it again. The world now knew what Project Raven 42 was. They saw the files, the hidden experiments, the manipulation of minds that were never meant to be weapons. It sparked a wave of anger, fear, and questions no one in power wanted to answer. At first, officials called it a hoax, deep fakes, fabricated evidence. But as more whistleblowers stepped forward, more names and places matched the documents, it became impossible to ignore. Families of veterans began demanding answers. Lawsuits were filed. Congress called for investigations. But Ella didn't wait for justice. She knew the people behind the project were already moving underground, hiding behind shell names and new operations. The man in the suit, the one who retrieved the second black box from the ruins, never showed up in the press. No one talked about him. Ella didn't know his name. But something told her he was part of something even deeper. She hadn't destroyed the program. Just exposed one layer of it. Still, that mattered. She hadn't saved everyone. She couldn't go back to the life she had before. But she'd broken the silence. The kind of silence that lets dangerous things grow in the dark. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel hunted. In the small Chilean clinic, Ella went by a different name. She worked quietly, stitching up wounds, comforting nervous mothers, helping old men walk again. There were no files on her here, no supervisors asking strange questions, no unmarked cars outside. Just people who needed care and were too far from the headlines to know who she used to be. At night, she'd write in a notebook. Not reports. Not records. Just thoughts. About trust. About how quickly it can be taken away. About the thin line between doing good and being used for something terrible. And about how sometimes, saving people doesn't mean fixing everything, it just means refusing to stay silent when silence helps the wrong side. Back in the US, Samir had gone quiet too. Ella didn't hear from him again. But she saw his name in a small footnote of a leaked article. Anonymous analyst responsible for uncovering key elements of the Raven 42 network. He'd done his part. Maybe he was running now too. Dr. Mercer hadn't resurfaced either. Some said he was dead. Others believed he'd vanished with the rest of the original project heads. Ella figured he'd gone somewhere even the government wouldn't think to look, because men like Mercer didn't fear exposure. They feared irrelevance. One day, as she was closing up the clinic, a small envelope arrived with no postage. Just her current name scribbled on the front. Inside was a single piece of paper. A list. 10 names. The top of the page read, "Pending activation." Her breath caught. These weren't just any names. They were nurses. Paramedics. Social workers. Ordinary people. All with backgrounds like hers. All probably unaware. Just like she had been. At the bottom, a handwritten note. "This time, you choose what happens next." There was no signature. Ella sat down slowly, hands trembling. She knew what this meant. The second layer. The next cycle. The one that hadn't been stopped when she blew the whistle. She stared at the list for a long time, then folded it and placed it in her bag. She didn't know what she was going to do yet. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to run anymore. She'd spent her whole life healing people, quietly, gently, without ever asking for anything in return. Maybe now, healing looked different. Maybe now, it meant finding the others before they were activated. Helping them wake up on their own terms. Giving them a choice before someone else made it for them. She turned off the lights in the clinic, locked the door, and stepped into the night. The stars were just starting to come out. She had a long road ahead. But this time, she wasn't alone. Because someone out there believed she could carry this. And this time, they were right. As the quiet settled again over the hills, the world kept spinning. News cycles moved on. people went back to their lives. But in the spaces between, in quiet rooms and hidden files, the legacy of Raven, 42 lingered. And Ella Morgan, whatever name she went by now, kept moving. Not as a weapon. Not as a nurse. But as a witness. A reminder. That even in the darkest systems, someone will always choose to step out of line and do the right thing. Even when it costs everything.